If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. Jason Richardson gazed at New York City from his office on the 52nd floor. From there, he could see the contrast between the mirrored skyscrapers of Fifth Avenue and the outskirts that stretched as far as the eye could see. At 45, he was the CEO of Richardson Investments, one of the largest publicly traded companies in America. His decisions moved billions and affected thousands of lives, something he rarely stopped to consider. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Monica, his secretary. "Mr. Richardson, the emergency meeting is ready. Everyone is waiting for you in the conference room." Jason adjusted his Italian tie, took one last look at his reflection in the window glass, and headed to the meeting. He knew the matter was serious. In the last 3 months, allegations about predatory practices at his company had leaked to the press. Investors were nervous, stocks were plummeting, and his reputation, built over 2 decades, was crumbling with each negative headline. Upon entering the room, he was greeted by the tense faces of his executive team. Catherine Meyer, marketing director, was the first to speak once he sat down. "Jason, the numbers don't lie. We've lost 38% of our market value in 45 days. Investors are jumping ship. We need a radical strategy to reverse this." "And what do you suggest?" "We've already hired the best PR agencies in the country," Jason replied impatiently. Richard Walker, his legal director and longtime friend, cleared his throat before speaking. "Press releases and donations aren't enough. People see you as a symbol of inequality, of greed. We need to humanize your image, transform the villain into a hero." Jason let out a dry laugh. "And how do you intend to perform this magic?" Catherine slid a folder across the table. "We have a plan, bold but with the potential to completely change the narrative." Jason opened the folder and frowned as he read the first page. "Is this a joke?" "Not at all," Catherine replied, maintaining her professionalism. "We're proposing a marriage, a union that demonstrates social commitment, humility, and transformation." "Marriage? To whom?" "My current girlfriend is an international model." "Getting?" "Married now would only reinforce the image of ostentation." Richard intervened. "We're not talking about Victoria. We're proposing something much more impactful, a marriage to someone who symbolizes the opposite of everything you currently represent." Jason looked at the faces around the table, waiting for someone to break the silence with a laugh, revealing that it was all a bad joke. No one did. "You want me to marry a homeless person? A homeless woman?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "We prefer the term person in social vulnerability," Catherine corrected. "And yes, that's exactly it. Imagine the headlines. Billionaire marries homeless woman and promotes true social transformation. It would be the masterstroke to rebuild your image." Jason stood up abruptly, adjusting his $10,000 Armani suit. "You've lost your minds. My personal life is not for sale." "Your company is," Richard retorted, with the frankness that only a friend of 3 decades could have. "In 6 months, if we continue this trend, Richardson Investments will be just a chapter in business textbooks about how giants can fall." Jason walked to the window, trying to process the absurd proposal. Behind the glass, the city pulsed, indifferent to his personal dilemma. He thought of his father, Arnold Richardson, who had started with a small brokerage firm in downtown Manhattan in the 80s, and the nights he had seen him work until dawn. The empire he had inherited and expanded was now threatened. "How would this work in practice?" he finally asked without turning around. Catherine explained the plan. They would carefully choose a homeless woman, someone with a clean appearance, no apparent vices, preferably young and articulate. They would offer a generous sum, a confidentiality, agreement, and after a determined period, a discreet divorce with a lifelong pension. Everything would be presented to the public as an unlikely romance, a meeting of souls that transcended social barriers. "We already have some candidates in mine," she concluded, passing over some more photos. Jason examined the images, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Women of different ages, all with looks that mixed helplessness and dignity. The last photo, however, caught his attention. A woman of approximately 35 years, prematurely grey curly hair, brown skin, and penetrating eyes that seemed to challenge the camera. "Who is she?" he asked, pointing to the photograph. "Sarah Davis. She usually stays around Washington Square Park. From what we've gathered, she's been homeless for approximately 2 years. She's articulate, educated, and maintains a relatively well-kept appearance, considering her circumstances." "And you think she would accept this?" "For $200,000 and a lifelong pension afterward. Who wouldn't?" Richard replied. Jason continued looking at Sarah's photo. There was something in that gaze that intrigued him, a strength that seemed out of place in someone living on the streets. What if she's a scammer? If she sells our story to the press? If she has a compromising past? "We've checked what was possible. There are no criminal records, and the contract she'll sign will be proof against any extortion attempt," Richard assured. "Besides, we'll keep someone monitoring her constantly." Jason returned to the table and sat down, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. Part of him revolted against the idea of turning something as personal as marriage into a marketing strategy. Another part recognized the genius of the plan. How much time do we have? The next quarterly results will be released in 6 weeks. If we want impact before that, we need to act quickly. After a few minutes of silence, Jason nodded. "Make the arrangements. But I want to meet her personally before any official approach. I want to look into this Sarah's eyes and make sure she understands what she's getting into." When the meeting ended, Jason remained alone in the conference room. He picked up Sarah's photo again and studied it more carefully. How had a woman with that look ended up on the streets? What was behind those defiant eyes? That night, in his penthouse apartment in the Upper East Side, Jason couldn't sleep. Between sips of imported whiskey, he wondered if he had gone crazy by agreeing to that plan. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Victoria, asking when he would return to Paris. Jason didn't respond. In his mind, he was already rehearsing how he would end that relationship without creating another scandal. On his laptop screen, Sarah's image stared at him, like an enigma he needed to decipher before it was too late. The morning was cool when Jason's driver parked the armored Mercedes at a safe distance from Washington Square Park, dressed in casual clothes to avoid attention, jeans and a polo shirt, items he rarely wore. Jason felt out of place stepping onto the sidewalks of Manhattan's historic center. "Are you sure you want to do this alone, sir?" asked Paul, his driver and personal security for over 10 years. "I am. Stay nearby, but keep your distance. I need this first contact to be as natural as possible." According to the information gathered by the team, Sarah usually spent mornings near the steps of the park, sometimes reading donated books, other times just observing the movement. Jason walked among vendors and passers-by, feeling strangely exposed without his armor of formality. That's when he saw her. Sitting on a worn bench, Sarah wore a simple but clean dress and had her hair tied in an improvised bun. In her hands, a worn book whose title Jason couldn't identify from afar. There was something in her posture that completely stood out from her surroundings, a silent dignity that impressed him. He approached slowly, mentally rehearsing what he would say. All the phrases he had prepared now seemed artificial and inadequate. When he was a few meters away, Sarah raised her eyes from the book. The penetrating gaze from the photograph was even more intense in person. "Can I help you with something?" she asked with a firm voice that surprised him. Jason hesitated. "Actually, I would like to talk to you, if you don't mind." Sarah closed the book, keeping her finger between the pages to mark where she stopped. "About? It's complicated. Could we have a coffee? There's a diner over at the corner." She studied him for a moment, with an expression that mixed curiosity and caution. "I don't usually go off with strangers, especially well-dressed men who appear out of nowhere wanting to talk." There was a hint of irony in her voice. "My name is Jason Richardson, and believe me, what I have to propose can change your life." A flash of recognition passed through her eyes upon hearing his name. "The Jason Richardson? The same one from the recent headlines?" He nodded, uncomfortable. Interesting, she said, standing up. Now I'm curious. Let's go to that coffee, Mr. Richardson, but only because I want to hear what absurd proposal a man like you would have for someone like me. The diner was simple, with formica tables and plastic seats. Jason ordered 2 coffees, and after the waitress moved away, took a deep breath. Ms. Davis. How do you know my last name? She interrupted, narrowing her eyes. That's part of the point. I know your name, I know you've been homeless for approximately 2 years, and I know you usually stay here in the central area. You had me investigated? Why? Jason realized he had started badly. Look, I'll get straight to the point. I'm in a complicated situation. My company is facing an image crisis, and my advisors suggested an unusual strategy to reverse this. Sarah took a sip of coffee, keeping her eyes fixed on him. And I'm part of this strategy? Yes. They suggested that I get married. Congratulations, but I still don't understand what that has to do with me. Jason lowered his voice. They suggested that I marry someone like you, someone in a vulnerable situation. The idea is to show that I'm capable of seeing beyond appearances, of connecting with realities different from mine. Sarah put her cup on the table with a dull thud. For a moment, Jason thought she would throw the coffee in his face or simply walk away indignantly. Instead, to his surprise, she started laughing. A genuine laugh that attracted glances from neighboring tables. Is this serious? You came all the way here to propose a fake marriage to me? She shook her head in disbelief. And how much would you pay me for this image transformation? $200,000 immediately after the ceremony, plus a lifelong pension after the divorce, which would happen in 1 or 2 years. Sarah stopped laughing, her demeanor becoming serious. And what exactly would I have to do? Appear at some social events, some interviews, pretend we really fell in love. Afterward, we would go our separate ways. And you think this will work? That people will believe this absurd story? Jason shrugged. People believe what they want to believe. A billionaire who falls in love with a homeless woman is the kind of modern fairy tale that the media loves. Sarah observed him in silence for a long moment, as if she were evaluating not just the proposal, but the man in front of her. Why me? She finally asked. There must be thousands of homeless women in New York. The question caught Jason off guard. He didn't have a ready answer because, honestly, he had asked himself the same thing since seeing her photograph. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's the way you carry yourself, the dignity you maintain even in your current circumstances. Or maybe... He hesitated. Maybe it's your gaze. There's something in it that seems... challenging. The answer seemed to surprise her. Sarah picked up her worn bag and took out a small notebook, equally worn. Before I answer, I want you to read this. She opened the notebook to a specific page and pushed it toward him. Jason picked up the notebook with hesitation. It was a diary, handwritten in an elegant calligraphy. Day 578. People pass by me as if I were invisible. I'm just another shadow in the urban landscape, another obstacle in the way. But I observe them, absorb their fragmented stories, their incomplete dialogues. Today, an executive stopped near me to take a call. He talked about millions as if talking about loose change, while completely ignoring the man lying a few meters away, wrapped in cardboard. There is a fundamental disconnection in this city, a selective blindness that allows so many tragedies to unfold in broad daylight, invisible to those who don't want to see. When Jason raised his eyes from the diary, he saw that Sarah was watching him carefully. You write well, he commented, genuinely impressed. Very well, actually. I was a writer, she replied simply, before everything fell apart. That information wasn't in the report about her. Jason felt intrigued. What happened? That's not part of your business proposal, is it? My personal history. No, but I'm curious. Then save your curiosity for later, if I accept your absurd proposal. She took the diary back. And if I accept, I want to add some conditions to the contract. Jason nodded. surprised by the confidence with which she negotiated. "Which ones?" "First, I want freedom to continue writing. Second, I want access to a substantial library. Third," she paused, as if evaluating whether she should continue, "I want you to read what I write, not everything, but what I deem important." Those weren't the conditions Jason expected. He thought she would ask for more money, jewelry, designer clothes. "That's unusual, but I accept your conditions." "I still haven't said I accept," she retorted. "And will you accept?" Sarah looked out the diner window, observing the movement in the square. After a long moment, she turned to face him again. "I will. Not for the 200,000, nor for the pension, although I won't pretend I don't need the money. I'll accept because I'm curious to see how far this farce can go and what I can learn about people like you in the process." Jason extended his hand, which she shook firmly. "We have a deal, then." "Yes, Mr. Richardson, we have a deal. Now, if you're going to transform me into your wife, I suggest we start with something basic. Call me Sarah." When they left the diner, Jason noticed Paul watching them discreetly from across the street. He made a subtle signal indicating that everything was fine. He looked at Sarah, who walked beside him with an erect posture that defied her circumstances, and wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. That woman was much more than she appeared to be, and something told him that the next few months would be very different from what he and his team had planned. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding passed like a whirlwind. Sarah was installed in a temporary apartment in Chelsea, where a complete team of professionals worked intensively on her transformation. Stylists, hairdressers, nutritionists, etiquette teachers, and even a communication coach were hired to prepare her for her new role. Catherine personally supervised every detail, satisfied with Jason's choice. Sarah was what she called a diamond in the rough, intelligent, articulate, and with a natural beauty that, once polished, would shine at social events. "I don't want her to seem artificial," Jason instructed during a meeting. "Keep her essence. That's what makes her interesting." That afternoon, he visited the apartment to check on the progress. He found Sarah sitting on the balcony reading. Her hair, previously dull, now displayed well-defined curls with strategically maintained grey streaks, giving her an air of natural sophistication. She wore a simple but elegant dress that flattered her silhouette without seeming ostentatious. "Good afternoon," he said, observing her with genuine interest. Sarah raised her eyes from the book. "Good afternoon. Have you come to inspect the investment?" The ironic tone didn't go unnoticed. "I came to see how you're adapting." "To the Golden Prison, reasonably well." She closed the book. "But I confess it's strange to have people deciding what clothes I should wear, how I should speak, and even what posture I should adopt." Jason sat in the chair next to her. "I see you continue to maintain your critical spirit." "It's what kept me sane on the streets. I'm not going to abandon it now." He nodded, respecting her frankness. "What are you reading?" Sarah showed the cover. "Pride and Prejudice." Ironic, isn't it? A story about arranged marriages and social differences. "I've never read it." She raised her eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "An educated man like you? I've always been more about numbers than letters. I don't have patience for novels." "That explains a lot." Sarah adjusted herself in the chair. "How are the preparations going?" "Moving forward. The ceremony will be small, just for family and close friends. Afterward, we'll give an exclusive interview to Time magazine, followed by a honeymoon in the Florida Keys." "The Florida Keys?" She seemed genuinely enthusiastic for the first time. "I've always wanted to visit." Jason smiled slightly, satisfied with having made the right choice of destination. "We'll leave the day after the ceremony. We'll stay for 2 weeks. 2 weeks alone." She bit her lip. "It will be interesting. We can have separate rooms if you prefer." Sarah gave a brief laugh. "Relax, Jason. I'm not going to try to seduce you to turn our agreement into something permanent. I'm not a character from a Hallmark movie." The comment left him disconcerted. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." She leaned forward. "But don't worry. I understand the parameters of our agreement. I'm the facade wife, not the lover. The silence that followed was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Catherine bringing a folder with the final details of the wedding. Ah, good that you're together. We need to finalize some points. She opened the folder on the table. Sarah, about your speech at the wedding dinner. I've already written it, interrupted Sarah, taking some folded sheets from inside the book. I prefer to use my own words. Catherine shot a worried look at Jason, who nodded. That's fine, I trust your judgment. In the days that followed, Jason found himself thinking about Sarah more frequently than expected. There was something about her, a rare authenticity in his social circle that intrigued him. While dealing with the final adjustments at the company before stepping away for the honeymoon, he caught himself several times distracted, recalling fragments of their conversations. The wedding day arrived, cloudy and with a fine drizzle typical of New York. The ceremony took place in a historic chapel in the Upper East Side, decorated with elegant simplicity, white flowers, candles, and a reduced number of guests, only 80 carefully selected people. When Sarah entered, wearing a wedding dress designed by an emerging American designer, a deliberate choice to reinforce the narrative of supporting national culture, a murmur of approval ran through the chapel. The dress was simple, made of lace and silk, enhancing her silhouette without excess. She walked with a confidence that surprised those present, without the shyness many expected, from someone rescued from the streets. During the exchange of vows, Sarah looked directly into Jason's eyes, with an intensity that made him momentarily forget that it was all an act. The words she pronounced, although part of the pre-established script, sounded strangely sincere. The reception was held in the gardens of a boutique hotel in Gramercy Park. As they circulated among the guests, Jason noticed how Sarah adapted with surprising ease to that environment. She conversed about art, literature, and even economics with fluency, impressing even the most skeptical among his friends. "Where did you really find her?" asked Sophie Mitchell, a socialite who had known Jason for years, while observing Sarah, animatedly conversing with a group of businessmen. "I already told you. In Washington Square Park." Sophie raised a perfectly outlined eyebrow. "Please, Jason, that woman has more class and intelligence than half the people at this party. You can tell the romanticized story to the press, but not to me." Before he could respond, he was called for the speeches. After his own speech, rehearsed and polished by Catherine, it was Sarah's turn. She stood up with no paper in hand and faced the audience of curious faces. "Many of you are here today wondering who I am," she began with a clear and firm voice. "The homeless woman who won the magnate's heart, the modern-day Cinderella. The perfect story for the tabloids." A tense silence settled in. Catherine, seated nearby, visibly stiffened. "The truth is that I am just a woman who has known the extremes of life up close, who learned that the line between having everything and having nothing is thinner than we imagine. Jason found me at a moment when I had lost almost everything, except my dignity and my ability to observe the world with critical eyes." She paused, looking directly at Jason. "What few people know is that, before we met, I already knew him. Not personally, but through the pages of newspapers, the comments on the streets, the fragmented conversations I heard as people passed by me, ignoring me as they ignore lampposts or trash cans. I knew him as the symbol of a system that, for many, is cruel and exclusionary. The discomfort was palpable. Jason felt a chill down his spine, fearing where that speech would go. But then I met him personally, and I discovered something that the headlines don't show. A complex man, capable of surprising gestures. A man who, despite all privileges, carries his own burdens and doubts." Sarah raised her glass. "I am not here to pretend that our story is a traditional fairy tale. I am here because I believe that unlikely relationships like ours can build bridges over social abysses that seem insurmountable. I am here because, against all odds, I found in Jason someone willing to see beyond appearances, beyond labels. And that, my friends, is much rarer and more precious than any fortune." The silence that followed was broken by hesitant applause that soon turned into a warm ovation. Catherine, visibly relieved, smiled and raised her glass. Jason, however, remained motionless, processing Sarah's words. She had transformed a lie into something that sounded almost like a truth, something with a purpose greater than simply saving his reputation. When their gazes crossed again, he saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't just the challenge he had noticed in their first meeting, but something more complex, a mixture of understanding and expectation, as if she challenged him not just to maintain the farce, but to make it real in some way. That night, after the last guest departed, Jason and Sarah were taken to the presidential suite of the hotel, where they would spend the night before leaving for the Florida Keys. In the elevator, an uncomfortable silence hung between them. "Your speech," he began, breaking the silence. "It was impressive." "Thank you," she replied simply. "I hope it served the purposes of your marketing strategy." The sudden coldness caught him off guard. It wasn't just that. It was sincere. Sarah stared at him. "And that surprises you? That I can be sincere even within this farce?" The elevator reached the penthouse before he could respond. Upon entering the luxurious suite with a view of the illuminated city, Sarah walked straight to the window, contemplating the lights. "It's strange," she said, more to herself than to him. "From down there, these lights seem so distant, so inaccessible." "Like stars." Jason approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "And now?" "Now I realize they're just lamps, some brighter, some dimmer, but all equally artificial." She turned to face him. "Tomorrow we begin our honeymoon, Jason. Our great performance. Are you prepared?" There was something in her tone that made him uncomfortable, as if she were several steps ahead in a game whose rules he was still trying to understand. "I think so," he replied, uncertain. "Great." Sarah smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because I have the feeling it will be a much more revealing trip than you imagine." The Florida Keys welcomed the couple with an intensely blue sky and crystal-clear waters that seemed to defy reality. The house rented by Jason was in an isolated area of the island, with a privileged view of the sea and total privacy, essential elements for a honeymoon that, although staged, needed to appear authentic for the occasional paparazzi who would certainly follow them. The property was luxurious without being ostentatious, with design that privileged integration with nature. Large glass windows, sustainable wood, and an infinity pool that visually merged with the ocean. The kind of place that appears in decoration and exclusive travel magazines. "It's beautiful," commented Sarah, watching the sunset from the veranda on the first day. She wore a light cotton dress and her curls danced with the sea breeze. "Have you been here before?" Jason, seated on a lounge chair nearby with a drink in hand, nodded. "A few times, usually for conferences or quick meetings. I've never had time to really enjoy the island." "The man who has everything but has no time to enjoy anything," she observed, with a hint of irony. "Classic." "And you?" he asked, ignoring the provocation. "Had you traveled much before, well, before your situation changed?" Sarah turned to the ocean again. "Yes. I visited several countries when I was younger. Europe, mainly, then some places in Latin America." "As a writer?" "Yes, I covered cultural events, literary festivals. I even lived in Barcelona for almost a year." There was a nostalgia in her voice that Jason hadn't heard before. "Why did you stop writing?" An enigmatic smile appeared on her lips. "Who said I stopped?" Before he could insist on the question, the chef hired for the stay announced that dinner was served. The table on the veranda was impeccably arranged, with candles and local flowers. The menu, prepared with ingredients from the island, included fresh fish, seafood, and tropical fruits. During dinner, Jason observed how Sarah seemed perfectly at ease in that luxurious environment. Her table manners were impeccable, her conversation fluid and interesting. Nothing about her suggested that until a few weeks ago she had been living on the streets. "You observe me as if I were an enigma to be deciphered," she commented, while savoring the dessert. "And aren't you?" "We all are, in a way. You're also an enigma to me, Jason." "Me? I'm an open book. What you see is what I am, a successful businessman with an image problem." Sarah laughed, a genuinely amused sound. "If you believe that, You're deceiving yourself even more than you're trying to deceive the public with this marriage." Her frankness constantly disconcerted him. In his world, people measured words, hid intentions, navigated in an ocean of understatements. Sarah was different, brutally honest even when honesty was uncomfortable. "What do you think you see in me, then?" he asked, genuinely curious. She studied him for a moment, as if considering how far she should go. "I see a man who has built a fortress around himself, so high and so thick that not even you can get out anymore. I see someone who has achieved everything that society says is important: money, power, status, and yet still seems unsatisfied." Jason looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Cheap psychological analyses don't go well with this expensive wine. "See? Defense through sarcasm. Classic." She took a sip of wine. "But that's okay. We have 2 weeks here. Maybe at some point, you'll feel safe enough for a real conversation." The following days established a surprisingly pleasant routine. In the morning, walks on deserted beaches or ecological trails. In the afternoon, dives in crystal-clear waters or moments of reading. By the pool, Sarah had brought a small collection of books and spent hours absorbed in them, occasionally making notes in her diary. On the 4th day, during a snorkeling session in a coral reef, Jason observed Sarah swimming with ease among colorful fish. There was a freedom in her movements, a genuine joy that made him smile involuntarily. When they emerged, they sat on the rocks to rest. "You seem happy here," he commented. "It's hard not to be happy in a place like this." She ran her fingers through her wet hair. "But yes, I'm enjoying it. I would be foolish not to take advantage of this opportunity, regardless of the circumstances that brought it. Pragmatic, realistic, something I learned on the streets. Enjoy what life offers today, because tomorrow everything can change." Jason remained silent, reflecting on her words. "How did you end up on the streets, Sarah? Someone with your intelligence, education." She sighed, looking at the horizon. "The fall can be quick, Jason, quicker than one imagines." After a moment of hesitation, she continued, "I was a respected writer. I'd published 3 books, collaborated with important newspapers and magazines. I had an apartment in Chelsea, traveled regularly. I wasn't rich, but I lived comfortably." She paused, as if organizing her thoughts. "Then I wrote a book that bothered powerful people. A book about corruption in high places, based on leaked documents I received from an anonymous source. When it was published, the reaction was intense." Jason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. What kind of reaction? Legal. Proceedings to start. Accusations of defamation, of manipulating facts. My publisher was pressured to withdraw the book from circulation. Then came the threats, subtle at first, then increasingly explicit. Sarah looked directly at him. "I tried to fight. I gathered more evidence, gave interviews, sought support from other journalists, but the people I denounced were too powerful. One by one, doors closed. Publishers no longer accepted my texts. Invitations to events were cancelled. My apartment was broken into twice. Didn't you go to the police?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Some of those involved were from the police or had connections there. I did file police reports, but they never led anywhere. And your family, friends, my parents, were already deceased. I have a sister, but we grew apart years before due to personal issues. As for friends, some tried to help, but most distanced themselves. Nobody wants to associate with someone who's become a target for powerful people." Jason absorbed every word, trying to imagine the trajectory that led that articulate and intelligent woman to the situation in which he had found her. The money ran out. I had to sell everything. The apartment, furniture, clothes, books. I rented increasingly smaller rooms in increasingly distant neighborhoods until I couldn't even afford that anymore. She took a deep breath. The streets weren't the plan, obviously, but when you have no alternatives, and the book, does it still exist? Some copies survived. They circulate clandestinely. Occasionally someone recognizes me, usually students or activists, but for the general public, it's as if it never existed. Jason observed her with a mixture of admiration and incredulity. How did you manage to maintain your sanity, your dignity? By writing. She pointed to the diary she always carried. Every day, no matter what happens, it's my way of processing the world, of maintaining some control over my narrative when everything else was taken from me. That night after dinner, Sarah brought her diary to the veranda where Jason was having a cognac, appreciating the stars. You said you wanted me to read what you write, he commented, observing her settle into the chair beside him. Yes, it's part of our agreement. She opened the diary to a marked page. I wrote this passage last night after you fell asleep. Jason picked up the diary carefully, aware of the value that simple object had for her. Under the soft light of the veranda lanterns, he began to read. There is an ocean inside him that has never been navigated. I observe Jason when he thinks I'm not looking. The moments of vulnerability that appear like lightning in a cloudy sky, too quick for others to notice, but not for me. I spent years observing people, deciphering the small gestures that reveal what words hide. He has built his life around numbers, spreadsheets, ascending graphs, as if success could be measured only in digits. But there are questions in his eyes that no bank account can answer. Questions about purpose, about meaning, questions that he may not even know he's asking. Jason raised his eyes from the diary, meeting Sarah's attentive gaze. You really see me that way? I see what's there. Maybe things that even you don't see. He returned the diary, feeling strangely exposed. Why show me this? Because this marriage, as artificial as it may be in its conception, places us in a forced intimacy. We are playing roles, but we can't pretend 24 hours a day. At some point, we see the other as they really are. Sarah leaned forward. I want to propose something. During these 2 weeks, whenever we are alone, without cameras or external gazes, let's be honest with each other. No characters, no facades, just Sarah and Jason, two people trying to understand what life has done to them. The proposal caught him off guard. Why? Because I'm tired of pretending. I've spent the last few years being invisible, and now I have to pretend to be someone I'm not. It's exhausting, she paused. And because I think you're also tired of pretending, even if you may not realize it. Jason contemplated the proposal, feeling a mixture of apprehension and relief. Part of him wanted to refuse, to maintain the walls he had carefully built over the years. Another part, however, yearned for that offer of authenticity. All right, he finally responded. No pretending when we're alone. The smile she gave him was different from all the previous ones, softer, more genuine. Great. So, Jason Richardson, now that we've agreed to be honest, I have a question. What are you really looking for? I'm not talking about saving your company or your reputation. I'm talking about you as a person. What do you want from life that you haven't yet achieved with all your money and power? The question hung between them like a living entity. Jason looked at the starry sky, seeking an answer that wouldn't sound banal or rehearsed. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to consider the question seriously, without the usual defenses. I don't know, he finally answered, with an honesty that surprised even himself. And maybe that's the problem. On the morning of the 8th day in the Florida Keys, Jason woke to the sound of voices coming from the veranda. Still drowsy, he recognized Sarah's voice, but the other, male and with a slight southern accent, was unfamiliar. Intrigued, he dressed quickly and headed toward the voices. Upon reaching the veranda, he found Sarah animatedly conversing with a man of approximately 50 years, graying hair and skin tanned by the sun. He wore simple but clean clothes and had an air of tranquility that contrasted with the tension Jason immediately felt. Ah, you're awake, said Sarah, smiling. Jason, this is Anthony Carter, an old friend. The man stood up and extended his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes perceptive. I finally meet the famous Jason Richardson. Sarah has told me a lot about you. Jason returned the greeting, trying to hide his surprise and discomfort. I didn't know we were expecting visitors. We weren't, Sarah replied naturally. Anthony found me. He has a special talent for that. Let's say I have good contacts, explained Anthony with an enigmatic smile. When I learned Sarah was in the Keys, I couldn't help but visit her, especially considering the circumstances. There was something in Anthony's tone that put Jason on alert. This man knew about the agreement. He looked at Sarah, who maintained a serene expression. Anthony and I worked together for many years, she explained. He was my editor at the newspaper, then became my literary agent. He was the one who helped me publish my most controversial book. Ah, so you're responsible for Sarah ending up on the streets? The question came out more aggressive than Jason intended. Instead of being offended, Anthony laughed. I see Sarah has shared part of her story with you. Interesting. Jason, Sarah intervened, Anthony was one of the few people who stood by my side when everything fell apart. He lost his job at the publishing house for refusing to withdraw my book from circulation. Jason suddenly felt ashamed of his hostility. I'm sorry, that was tactless of me. Don't worry, Anthony replied, sitting back down. Your reaction is understandable. A stranger appears during your honeymoon. Any husband would be uncomfortable. The use of the word husband carried a subtle irony that didn't go unnoticed by Jason. Anthony came to bring me something important, explained Sarah, indicating a folder on the table. Some documents he managed to recover for me. What kind of documents? Evidence, Anthony replied before Sarah could speak. Proof that corroborates the allegations Sarah made in her book. Documents that, at the time, were dismissed as forgeries or speculations, but that now can be verified. Jason sat down, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. And why bring this now during our honeymoon? Sarah and Anthony exchanged glances. Because now Sarah has a platform again, explained Anthony. As Jason Richardson's wife, her words have weight. People who previously ignored her will now listen to her. Wait a moment, interrupted Jason, alarmed. This wasn't part of our agreement. Our marriage is a strategy to rebuild my image, not to resurrect a journalistic crusade that almost cost her life. Her life? Anthony raised his eyebrows. Interesting choice of words. So Sarah told you about the threats? Yes, she mentioned them, Jason replied, uncomfortable. But she probably didn't tell all the details, continued Anthony, about how they found the body of our informant in a vacant lot in Newark, or how her apartment was accidentally set on fire when she was about to deliver more evidence to the FBI. Jason looked at Sarah, who kept her gaze fixed on the table, her hands slightly trembling. Is this true? She nodded slowly. I didn't tell everything. Some memories are difficult. And you want to resurrect this now? Put Sarah at risk. Again? The risk never completely disappeared, Anthony replied. But now the situation is different. As the wife of a powerful man, Sarah has protection, visibility, and the people she denounced have more to lose by attacking Mrs. Richardson than they had attacking a freelance journalist. Jason shook his head in disbelief. You're using our marriage as a shield. And you're using Sarah as a PR accessory, Anthony replied calmly. Don't judge our motivations without examining yours, Mr. Richardson. Enough, both of you, Sarah intervened. Anthony, you've already delivered what you came to deliver. I appreciate your concern and your effort, but the decisions about what to do with these documents are mine. And Jason, she turned to him, our agreement remains as it is. I won't do anything that compromises your image or the strategy we've established. Anthony stood up, recognizing the cue to leave. I'll respect your decision, Sarah, as I always have. He picked up a straw hat that was on the table, but remember what I always said, the truth doesn't expire. Eventually it finds its way. After a warm hug for Sarah and a formal handshake, for Jason, Anthony departed, leaving behind a silence charged with tension. I'm sorry about that, Sarah finally said. I didn't know he would come. But you don't seem surprised by what he brought, she sighed. Anthony never gave up on our work. Even when I had to step away to survive, he continued investigating, collecting evidence, maintaining contact with sources, and now he wants you to use your new status as my wife to resume that battle. He wants justice as I wanted, as I still want, on some level. Sarah looked at the folder on the table. "But I understand the terms of our agreement, Jason. I won't do anything that harms you." Jason observed her carefully, noticing the internal struggle reflected in her eyes. For the first time, he clearly saw the sacrifice she was making, not just by pretending to be his wife, but by abandoning a cause for which she had risked everything. "Who were these people you denounced?" he asked, surprising himself with his own interest. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yes, if we're going to keep our promise of honesty, I need to understand what's at stake for you." She nodded, opening the folder Anthony had brought. From inside, she took out a worn copy of a book titled Shadows of Power, The Network That Controls America. On the cover, Sarah Davis's name as the author. "My third and last book," she explained. "It started as an investigation into money, laundering schemes involving construction companies and the real estate market in New York. But as I dug deeper, I discovered connections with politicians, judges, high-ranking businessmen." She opened the book to a marked page where there was a diagram showing connections between various companies and people. "This man here," she pointed to a name in the center of the diagram, "is Eugene Morgan. Officially a respected businessman in the real estate sector, unofficially the center of a corruption network that moves billions." Jason felt a chill. He knew Eugene Morgan. Not personally, but their paths had crossed at social events, and Richardson Investments had financed some of his projects in the past. "His ventures are facades for money laundering," continued Sarah. "Money from bribes, from misappropriation of public funds, from overpriced contracts. He has connections with at least 3 governors, dozens of congressmen, and several judges in superior courts." Jason leafed through the book, recognizing other names, people with whom he had dined, shaken hands, done business. The discomfort grew in his chest. When the book was published, the reaction was immediate. Defamation lawsuits, smear campaigns against me, pressure on the publisher. In a few months, I was portrayed as an irresponsible journalist who had fabricated a conspiracy to sell books. And there was no one who could support you. No institution. Sarah smiled sadly. The institutions that should have protected me were compromised, and those that weren't were afraid to oppose such powerful people. Jason continued examining the book, absorbing the extent of Sarah's allegations and the meticulousness of her investigation. It wasn't an amateur or sensationalist work, but solid research based on documents, testimonies, and detailed financial analyses. "This is," he searched for the right word, "impressive, the work you did here." "Thank you," she replied with a small smile. "It was the work of my life, literally, considering what it cost." "And what did Anthony bring now? What new evidence is this?" Sarah picked up another envelope from the folder. "Banking documents that confirm transfers between shell companies linked to Eugene and overseas accounts belonging to 3 judges who archived cases against him. Records of secret meetings between him and politicians who subsequently approved legislation that directly benefited him. And," she hesitated, "phone records that directly connect him to the fire in my apartment." Jason felt his stomach sink. The situation was much more serious than he had initially imagined. "And what do you intend to do with this?" Sarah slowly closed the folder. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to resume the fight, use this new platform I have as your wife to finally expose the truth. Another part," she paused, "another part is tired. Tired of fighting, of being persecuted, of living in fear." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of waves breaking on the beach below. Jason observed Sarah, the strength in her eyes contrasting with the vulnerability in her posture. He saw for the first time with total clarity the complexity of the woman he had married. She wasn't just a homeless woman with an interesting past, but a wounded warrior, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her principles. "What would you do in my place, Jason?" she suddenly asked. The question caught him off guard. "Me?" "Yes. If you had evidence of a corruption scheme that affects the entire country, but knew that exposing that evidence could cost you everything, what would you do?" Jason reflected on the question, aware that his answer would reveal more about himself than he might be prepared to show. "Honestly, probably nothing," he finally admitted. "I would convince myself that it wasn't my fight, that it wasn't worth the risk, that others could do it in my place." Sarah nodded with no judgment in her gaze. "And that's why we are where we are, isn't it? You building empires and me living on the streets. Our choices define us, for better or worse." Those words hit Jason with a force he didn't expect. He saw himself reflected in her eyes, not as the powerful CEO, the successful man the world knew, but as someone who had made safe choices, who had prospered within a system without ever questioning it. "It's not too late to make different choices," she said, almost in a whisper. Before Jason could respond, his cell phone rang. It was Catherine, reminding him of the dinner that was scheduled for that night with an influential travel blogger who had coincidentally arrived on the island and had asked to meet the newlywed couple. "Real-life calls," commented Jason as he hung up. "Though we have to return to our roles." Sarah nodded, storing the book and documents in the folder. "Yes, we have a show to maintain." While she withdrew to prepare for dinner, Jason remained on the veranda, contemplating the ocean. The revelations of that morning had shaken his certainties, forcing him to question not only the system in which he operated, but his own role within it. Anthony's visit had brought more than incriminating documents. It had brought questions that Jason had never allowed himself to ask. And now, in the silence of that veranda overlooking the sea, he wondered if he was prepared for the answers. The following days passed in a delicate balance between public moments, where they played the role of the loving couple, and private moments, marked by increasingly deep conversations. Anthony's visit had removed the last barrier between them, bringing to the surface issues that transcended the commercial agreement that united them. On the morning of the 12th day in the EC, Florida Keys, Jason received an unexpected call from his sister, Rebecca. "Jason, I need your help," she said with a trembling voice. "Lily has had a high fever for 2 days. The doctor here said it could be dengue fever. I need to take her to Miami, but all flights are booked because of a festival happening on the island." Lily, Jason's niece, was only 6 years old and was the center of Rebecca's universe, a single mother since her husband had abandoned her during pregnancy. The two were spending vacation on a smaller island near the Florida Keys. "Stay calm," Jason replied, feeling the urgency in his sister's voice. "I'll send the private jet to pick you up. It should arrive in a few hours." Sarah, who was listening to the conversation from the veranda, approached when Jason hung up, visibly concerned. "Your niece is sick." "Yes, it seems serious. Rebecca is panicking." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah had already identified as a sign of his anxiety. "I'm going to send the pilot to pick them up and bring them here. From the Keys, it's easier to get a flight to the mainland." "When do they arrive?" "In 3 or 4 hours, if all goes well." Sarah nodded. "I'll prepare the guest room and see with the chef what we can offer for a sick child." The efficiency and practicality with which she took charge of the situation surprised Jason. While he made calls to arrange transportation, Sarah organized the house to receive an ill child, requesting medicinal teas, light soups from the staff, and checking the air conditioning temperature in the rooms. When Rebecca and Lily finally arrived, the girl was feverish and lethargic. Rebecca, normally composed and elegant, seemed to have aged years in a few days, with deep dark circles and a face marked by worry. "Thank you for helping us," she said, hugging her brother. Then she noticed Sarah, who was discreetly keeping a few steps back. "You must be Sarah. I'm sorry to invade your honeymoon like this." "Don't worry about it," Sarah replied, with a gentle smile. "We'll take care of Lily. The room is ready with controlled temperature, and I've already ordered some light meals that might help her recover." Rebecca looked at her sister-in-law with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Clearly, it wasn't what she expected from the homeless woman her brother had married, in an arrangement that the whole family knew was artificial. Sarah guided Rebecca and Lily to the prepared room, while Jason accompanied the pilot with the luggage. When he returned, he found Sarah sitting on the bed next to Lily, applying cold compresses to her forehead while telling a story in a low and melodious voice. Rebecca observed from the armchair beside, with an expression of relief at seeing her daughter finally relaxed after days of feverish agitation. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jason asked later, when they left mother and daughter resting of home. "The streets. You learn to take care of others," Sarah replied simply. "I had a friend who caught pneumonia during a particularly rigorous winter. We sheltered in an abandoned building, and I took care of her for weeks, improvising with what we had." That night, while they dined on the veranda, Rebecca joined them, leaving Lily sleeping under the effect of antipyretics. "She's better," she informed, serving herself a glass of wine. "The fever has gone down a bit. Thank you for the care, Sarah. You didn't expect that a former homeless person would know how to take care of a sick child," completed Sarah, with a smile that softened the acidity of the observation. Rebecca blushed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be prejudiced. It's just that, well, Jason told us so little about you, and the circumstances of the wedding were so unusual." "Don't worry," Sarah replied. "I understand the surprise. I didn't expect to be here myself, in a luxurious house in the Florida Keys, taking care of my husband's niece." The term husband hung in the air for a moment, charged with irony that only Jason and Sarah fully understood. The conversation flowed to lighter topics, with Rebecca revealing herself to be more relaxed and open than Jason expected. His sister, always so critical and protective, seemed genuinely impressed with Sarah. The next morning, while they were having breakfast, a scream from Rebecca broke the tranquility. They ran to the room and found Lily convulsing in bed, her eyes rolled back, her body shaking in violent spasms. "My God, what's happening?" shouted Rebecca, paralyzed with terror. Jason froze, not knowing how to react. It was Sarah who took control of the situation. With quick and precise movements, she turned Lily on her side, removed objects that could hurt her, and began giving instructions. "Jason, call the island's doctor, explain the situation. Say we need an ambulance urgently. Rebecca, help me keep her on her side so she doesn't choke. Don't try to hold her movements, just protect her head." While Jason ran to make the call, Sarah remained by Lily's side, monitoring the duration of the seizure and constantly checking if the girl could breathe adequately. When the spasms finally ceased after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah checked the child's vital signs. "The seizure has stopped, but she needs urgent medical attention," she said to Rebecca, who was crying silently. "It was probably caused by the high fever, but we need to rule out other possibilities." Jason returned to the room pale. "The ambulance is on the way. The hospital here is small, but it has a pediatric emergency unit." In the anguishing minutes that followed, Sarah maintained her calm, guiding Rebecca and Jason on what to tell the doctors, what symptoms Lily had presented in the last few days, and how the seizure had manifested. When the ambulance arrived, Sarah refused to stay behind. "I'm going with you," she said, with a firmness that admitted no contestation. "I know the medical protocols for cases like this. I can help." At the small island hospital, while Lily underwent tests, Rebecca finally asked what was on her mind since the morning. "How did you know what to do? During the seizure, you acted like a professional." Sarah hesitated, exchanging a quick look with Jason before answering. "I volunteered in a community health project for a few years before everything changed in my life. We dealt with medical emergencies in communities without adequate access to health care." One more piece of the puzzle that was Sarah Davis fell into place for Jason. Each revelation about her past only increased his admiration for her. The doctor returned with news that brought partial relief. The seizure had been caused by the high fever, a condition known as febrile seizure, common in children. There was no neurological damage, but Lily would need to remain hospitalized for at least 48 hours for fever control and intravenous hydration. "One of you can stay with her in the room," the doctor informed. "We have limited accommodations, so only one person." "I'll stay," Rebecca said immediately. "We'll return to the house and bring clothes and whatever else you need," offered Jason. When they returned to the hospital hours later, with a suitcase containing essential items for Rebecca and Lily, they found the girl awake, still feverish but conscious, while Rebecca read a story to her. "Aunt Sarah," exclaimed Lily upon seeing them, surprising everyone with the familiarity of the treatment. "Mom said it was you who helped me when I got sick." Sarah smiled, approaching the bed. "And you're already much better, I see. Soon you'll be able to return to playing on the beach. Will you come back to read stories to me? Mom said you tell the best stories." "Of course I'll come back," promised Sarah, exchanging a look of understanding with Rebecca. When they left the room to give privacy to mother and daughter, Jason stopped Sarah in the hallway. "Aunt Sarah? The best stories. Here it seems you've won over my niece and my sister in record time." Sarah shrugged, but couldn't hide a satisfied smile. Children are good judges of character. And as for Rebecca, let's say we share more than she imagines. How so? We're women who have faced adversities, each in her own way. She as a single mother, me on the streets. There's a common resilience there, an understanding without words. In the next 2 days, they established a routine of visits to the hospital. While Rebecca rested a bit, Sarah stayed with Lily, telling stories that the girl loved, tales of princesses who saved kingdoms, of brave girls who faced monsters, stories very different from the traditional fairy tales that Lily knew. Jason observed that interaction with a mixture of fascination and confusion. The woman who told stories to his niece, who had acted with such competence during a medical emergency, who conversed as an equal with his sister, seemed increasingly distant from the image of the homeless woman who had agreed to marry him for money. On the night before Lily's hospital discharge, while dining on the house's veranda, Jason finally expressed what was on his mind. "You continue to surprise me." Sarah raised her eyes from her plate. "How so?" "The way you handled this whole situation. Lily's seizure, the hospital, the support. For Rebecca, you act as if you've done this your whole life." "In a way I have," she replied after a moment of reflection. "Taking care of others, improvising in crisis situations, staying calm when everything seems to be falling apart. These are skills I developed long before living on the streets. As an investigative journalist, I often found myself in dangerous or unforeseen situations." She paused, taking a sip of wine. "And on the streets, these skills were refined. When you don't have the security of walls, of locks, of a phone to call for help, you learn to trust your instincts, to act quickly, to adapt. Still, you could have kept your distance. This family drama wasn't part of our agreement." Sarah studied him for a moment, as if considering how much she should reveal. "I can't see a child suffering and do nothing, Jason. I can't see someone in need and turn my back. This has nothing to do with our agreement or with the role I'm playing. It's who I am." Those simple words deeply affected Jason. It was a raw honesty, devoid of calculation or pretension. For the first time, perhaps, he was seeing Sarah completely without masks. Not the homeless woman, not the facade wife, not the journalist fallen from grace, but the essence of the woman behind all these facets. "And is that why you risked everything for your book? Because you couldn't turn your back on the injustices you discovered?" "Yes," she answered simply, "even knowing the price would be high, even when everyone told me to back down, to think of myself first." "I don't know if I would have that courage," admitted Jason. "We all have choices to make, Jason. Every day, every moment. What defines our character isn't the big dramatic decisions, but the sum of all these small daily choices." The silence that followed was interrupted by the ring of Jason's phone. It was Rebecca, informing that Lily would sleep through the night and that she would also try to rest. "You know," said Jason upon hanging up, "when I proposed this marriage, I thought I was offering you a way out of the streets, an opportunity to start over. But increasingly I have the feeling that perhaps it's you who's offering me something much more valuable." "And what would that be?" "A different perspective, a gaze that sees beyond appearances, beyond numbers, beyond success, measured in zeros in the bank, account." Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her eyes. Maybe that's what both of us were looking for, without knowing. Not just a commercial transaction, but a real exchange of experiences, of worldviews. When they retired to sleep, in separate rooms as they had maintained throughout the stay, Jason felt a restlessness he couldn't name, Sarah's words echoed in his mind, challenging convictions that he had considered unshakable for so long. Lying in the darkness, he reflected on how his life had changed in such a short time. What had begun as a calculated PR strategy was transforming into something much more complex and meaningful. And at the center of that transformation was Sarah, the woman he had rescued from the streets, but who, in subtle and profound ways, seemed to be rescuing him too. The return to New York occurred amid a storm, both literal and metaphorical. Jason's private plane faced turbulence during almost the entire journey, a harbinger of what awaited them in the city. As the jet descended at LaGuardia Airport, Catherine was waiting for them with urgent news. As soon as they stepped onto the EC tarmac, they were greeted by her, visibly tense. "We couldn't have predicted this," she said, handing Jason a tablet with headlines from various news portals. "It broke while you were incommunicado at the hospital." Jason felt his blood freeze as he read the main headline. Jason Richardson's wife is author of book that denounced corruption scheme involving businessman's business partners. Sarah, reading, over his shoulder, turned pale. "How did they find out?" "Someone leaked it to the press," Catherine replied. "We don't know who, but the connection has been made. And now everyone is resurrecting your book, your allegations. It's going viral." In the armored car that took them from the airport to Jason's apartment, the silence was heavy. Catherine updated them on the repercussions. Journalists camped at the building's door, interview requests pouring in, Richardson Investments shares oscillating frantically as the market tried to understand the implications of the revelations. "It's a PR nightmare," she concluded. "We need a strategy immediately. Perhaps a statement denying prior knowledge of the book, distancing Richardson Investments from the mentioned companies." "No," interrupted Jason, surprising both Catherine and Sarah. "We're not going to deny anything." "What do you mean?" Catherine stared at him, incredulous. "Jason, this could destroy everything we've built in the last few weeks. The carefully reconstructed image. The image built on a lie," he completed, with a clarity that surprised even himself. "I'm tired of lies, Catherine, of half-truths, of strategic manipulations." Sarah was watching him attentively, a mixture of surprise and something more, perhaps hope, in her eyes. "What are you suggesting then?" asked Catherine, trying to maintain professional composure. "I want a press conference. Tomorrow. I'll speak personally about this." "Without a prepared statement, without a damage control strategy, this is corporate suicide, Jason." "Maybe," he replied calmly, "or maybe it's exactly what we need to do." When they arrived at the apartment, a duplex penthouse in one of New York's most exclusive buildings, they found, as expected, a battalion of journalists waiting. Thanks to the garage access and the building's reinforced security, they managed to enter without being seen. Once in the apartment, Sarah immediately headed to the balcony, observing the city that had ignored her for so long and now seemed eager for her story. "You don't have to do this," she said when Jason joined her. "You can discard me, say you were deceived, that you didn't know about my past. It would save your company." "At the cost of the truth?" He shook his head. "No. I've made choices like that before, prioritizing business over principles. I don't want to live that way anymore." Sarah studied him carefully, as if trying to determine the sincerity of his words. "What changed?" "You," he answered simply. "Meeting you. Seeing how you maintained your integrity even when it cost everything. How you helped Lily without hesitation. How you face life with honesty, even when it would be easier to compromise." She smiled, a soft smile but full of contained emotion. "2 weeks ago you saw me as a marketing strategy, and you saw me as a billionaire without scruples. People change, Sarah, or perhaps they just rediscover parts of themselves that they had forgotten." That night, while Catherine frantically worked on preparations for the press conference, against her best professional recommendation, Jason and Sarah sat in the apartment's library, planning what they would say. "If you really want to do this," said Sarah, "you need to understand all the implications. Some of the people I denounced have connections to your company. Joint businesses, shared investments. "No," replied Jason. "I've already requested a complete audit. I want to know exactly where we're vulnerable, which projects we need to abandon, which relationships we need to cut. This could cost billions. Probably, he shrugged with an indifference that surprised them both. But I'll still have enough to live comfortably and to finance things that really matter. Like what? Like a foundation dedicated to supporting independent investigative journalism, he answered, observing her reaction. Or a fund to help homeless people rebuild their lives. Or both. Sarah's eyes shone with contained emotion. You're serious. I've never been more serious in my entire life. The next morning, the Richardson Investments auditorium was packed. Journalists from all important media outlets in the country, and some international ones, crowded in for what promised to be one of the most significant press conferences of the year. When Jason and Sarah entered side by side, an expectant silence fell over the room. He wore a simple suit without a tie, a deliberate choice to signal a change in posture. She wore a navy blue dress, professional yet elegant, her curly hair with grey streaks framing her determined face. Jason adjusted the microphone and faced the crowd of journalists. Good morning. I appreciate everyone's presence. I know there are many questions about the recent revelations regarding my wife's past, Sarah Davis Richardson. We are here to answer them with total transparency. He paused, briefly looking at Sarah, who nodded, encouragingly. First, I want to confirm that yes, Sarah is the author of the book Shadows of Power, which denounced a corruption scheme involving important figures in the American business and political scene. And yes, some of the names mentioned in her book had or still have commercial relationships with Richardson Investments. A murmur ran through the room. Second, I want to make it clear that I knew Sarah's story before we got married. I wasn't deceived, I wasn't manipulated. On the contrary, I was deeply inspired by her courage and integrity. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the public declaration that diverged from the script they had rehearsed. Jason continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. For years I operated within a system that privileges profits over principles, that celebrates financial success without questioning the means to achieve it. I built an empire following those unwritten rules, closing my eyes to practices that, if not illegal, certainly navigated in morally murky waters. He took a deep breath. Meeting Sarah, not just her story, but the extraordinary person she is, made me question that system, question my own choices. And today I'm here to announce some fundamental changes. The camera flashes intensified, capturing the moment that everyone felt was historic. First, Richardson Investments is initiating today a complete and independent audit of all its businesses, with special attention to those involving companies or individuals mentioned in Sarah's book. All results will be public, and all problematic commercial relationships will be terminated, regardless of the financial cost. Catherine, watching from the back of the room, looked about to faint. Richard, the legal director, was frantically taking notes. Second, I am announcing the creation of the Davis Richardson Foundation, with an initial fund of $50 million dedicated to two main fronts: support for independent investigative journalism and social reintegration programs for people in vulnerable situations. Sarah couldn't contain a tear, which silently slid down her face. And third, Jason paused, looking directly at Sarah. I want to announce that our marriage, which began as a public relations strategy, yes, I am publicly admitting this, has transformed into something much more true and meaningful than I ever imagined possible. A collective gasp ran through the auditorium. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes, unable to disguise her surprise. Sarah has taught me the value of courage, integrity, persistence in the face of adversities that would have broken weaker people. And for that, today, in front of all of you, I want to do something I didn't properly do the first time. To everyone's shock, including Sarah's, Jason knelt before her, taking her hand. Sarah Davis, would you do me the honor of being my wife? Not by contract, not by strategy, but because, against all odds, in the midst of a farce, we found something true. For a moment that seemed eternal, the entire auditorium held its breath. Sarah looked at Jason, tears now flowing freely. When? She spoke. Her voice was low but firm. On one condition. Jason, still kneeling, nodded. Anything. That we always remain honest with each other, even when the truth is inconvenient or painful. That this commitment to truth that we are assuming today before everyone extends to every aspect of our lives. I promise, he replied, with a sincerity that surprised even himself. Then yes, said Sarah, smiling through tears. Yes, I accept. The room exploded in applause and flashes. Journalists stood up, some even discreetly, wiping away tears. The story of the billionaire and the homeless woman had just gained a chapter that no one, not even the protagonists, had predicted. In the days and weeks that followed, the media storm continued, but with a completely different tone than expected. Sarah's story was rescued, her book republished, and quickly became a bestseller. The allegations she had made years before finally received the attention they deserved, resulting in official investigations and the downfall of important figures. In the business and political scene, Richardson Investments suffered, as expected, significant losses. Some investors withdrew their capital, projects were cancelled, partnerships dissolved. But surprisingly, new investors emerged, attracted by the ethical and transparent posture that the company now adopted under Jason's leadership and with Sarah's consultancy. The Davis-Richardson Foundation quickly became a transformative force, financing investigative reports that otherwise wouldn't have resources to be carried out, and creating innovative support programs for homeless people with special focus on education and reintegration into the job market. 6 months after the famous press conference, Jason and Sarah renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony on the same beach in the Florida Keys where they had spent their honeymoon. Only family members and close friends were present, including Anthony, who served as best man, and Lily, completely recovered, as the flower girl. At the reception, held in the same house they had rented before, Rebecca raised her glass for a toast. To Sarah, she said with emotion in her voice, the woman who not only saved my daughter but also my brother, who taught us that true wealth is not in bank accounts or stocks, but in the courage to live according to our convictions, even when the price is high. Sarah, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, looked at Jason beside her. And to Jason, she added to the toast, the man who had the courage to question everything he had been taught about success and value, who chose a more difficult path, but infinitely more rewarding. Later, when the guests had already withdrawn, the couple walked on the beach under the moonlight, the same ocean, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their journey together, now illuminated a completely different path than they had imagined. If someone had told me a year ago that I would end up truly in love with the woman I hired for a facade marriage, began Jason, shaking his head in disbelief, and if someone had told me that the arrogant billionaire who approached me in Washington Square Park would end up becoming one of the greatest advocates for social justice and corporate transparency in the country, complimented Sarah, laughing. They stopped, contemplating the ocean that stretched infinitely before them. You know what impresses me the most, said Jason, embracing her by the waist. How small choices can change everything. If I hadn't agreed to that absurd plan to marry a homeless woman, if I hadn't decided to accept your crazy proposal, if we hadn't promised to be honest with each other during the honeymoon, if Lily hadn't gotten sick, giving me the chance to show another face of who I am. Jason looked into Sarah's eyes, those same challenging eyes that had intrigued him since the first photograph he saw of her. Life is made of choices, as you always say, and I'm grateful for every choice that brought us here. Even those that cost a few billion, she teased with a mischievous smile, especially those, he replied serious, because they brought me something that no money can buy. What? Purpose, inner peace, and you, of course. They kissed under the starry sky of the Florida Keys, while the waves gently washed the beach sand. Two worlds that should never have met, now united by something much stronger and more lasting than any contract. A love born of honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to choose the harder path when it would be so easy to follow the current. And that night, as the island slept around them,